Okay, buckle in, because this is going to be a long one. Because today we're going to be talking about One Piece. One Piece is the last of Shonen Jump's big three to still continue, and no, I'm not considering Boruto as a continue to Naruto. Naruto, the series, ended and it started a secondary sequel series. So One Piece, which started at roughly the same time as Naruto and Bleach, is the only one that's still running. It's over 1,000 chapters. It's a very long weekly series, and unfortunately, it suffers from the same problem that both Bleach and Naruto does, in that, unfortunately, the bigger the scope, the bigger your problems. So One Piece starts off on very well-worn ground. Pirates, much like cowboys, have always been sort of seen as anti-authority figures, and the storyline appealing to teenage boys of pirates hunting for treasure, being seen as outlaws and anti-authority figures is nothing really new. Let's also be clear, one of the strongest points about early One Piece is that all of the main characters are all interesting and also all have their own unique goal. All of them stand out, and all of them work as individuals, not just as parts of a whole. Oftentimes what happens in series with lots of characters is that they all get kind of worn down and they all don't really have time to shine because there are just so many characters and there's only so many panels that you can draw. And so One Piece early on manages this because all of the main crew members all have their own goals, all have their own directions, and so you can invest in them as individuals, not just as them being accessories to our main character's story. Luffy himself also works really well early on because he's idealistic, he's good-hearted, he's stupid, but on the other hand, he sees the best in people, and so that works to kind of counteract all of the negativity that surrounds him. He draws people in specifically because he is a better person than those around him. And so you can see why these main characters, you can see why all these other people are willing to follow him. You're never asking, man, why would anyone follow this guy? You're not having the problems that you're going to have later on, because early on, they specifically highlight and focus his qualities as a leader, as a focus point for everyone else around him. In fact, one of the things that really works in the series' favor is that they focus on the fact that he's from basically the edge of the earth. He's in one of the deep blue seas, and, he's not really familiar with the rest of the world. And so as he starts his journey, he learns about the world as we, the audience, learn about the world. And that's really important, because the bigger your world is, the bigger the scope, the more problems you're going to have in trying to explain everything, and we're going to get to that, don't worry. But in the beginning, when they're explaining things and demonstrating things and trying to give everything a sense of scale and scope, it really works, because you're contrasting everything and all the stories compared to what you see as he starts out. One of the things that One Piece does well early on is that they talk about the rest of the world in almost mythological terms. They talk about the Grand Line being this amazing place where it's the most, dangerous place on the planet, where only the most insane or foolhardy or courageous people go. They talk about, the four emperors and, all the pirate hunters who, have signed up with the government and stopped being pirates. They talk about, how strong and how dangerous these people are. And, one of the early arcs is when Don Krieg shows up, and he's like, he was a huge pirate, and then he went to the Grand Line, and all of his power meant nothing, and he came back, completely humiliated and defeated. And, they build up the Grand Line. They build up this place as being an amazing place. And they build it up as a place where you're like, wow, I can't wait for our characters to go there and challenge themselves there. The problem is that One Piece runs out of steam very quickly. One Piece, unfortunately, as I said, has the problem of the bigger your scope, the bigger your problems. And all of the big three had this problem, and they all answered it differently. and One Piece probably answered it the worst. Like, Bleach couldn't answer it. Bleach just could not answer it and collapsed under its own weight. That was their solution. Naruto's solution was ignore the fact that there's a problem, push through ahead anyway, and then end the series and try to start from scratch and hope that nobody noticed that you have the problem to begin with. One Piece's solution is to make the problem worse. And unfortunately, making the problem worse doesn't make a problem go away. Because One Piece likes to add so many ideas and concepts and characters and organizations and backstories that nothing is explained, nothing makes sense, and it gets less coherent as it goes on, even as they're repeating things and revising things. One Piece is like a series that has ADHD, in that it just keeps producing new ideas, and never at any point feels the need to actually like resolve any of the plot threads that it continues to weave. Here's a good example. The entire series is predicated on one very easy idea. There's a pirate who was the Pirate King, named Gold Roger, who is basically Blackbeard, except Blackbeard literally exists. And he had a treasure, and it was amazing, and he was executed, and he told everybody, hey, my treasure's yours, and you can find it. It's basically Treasure Island mixed with the legend of Blackbeard, and that there's a mythical treasure owned by the Pirate King that's out there somewhere, and if you can find it, it's yours. And everybody wants it. That's a very simple setup. It's a very easy setup to an adventurous plot line. It's a very easy setup to a pirate story. Again, it's Treasure Island. There's a treasure out there, and people want it. The problem is that One Piece can't do anything simply. And so, as time goes on, you encounter more people, and then you start to realize that no one actually knows what One Piece is. Nobody knows what the treasure is, or where it is, or what you have to do to get it, or if it exists, or why you would want it. That's the problem, is that, like, people, they make an easy story convoluted for no reason. What on earth is One Piece? Nobody knows. There's no idea. No one has any idea what it is, or why they would want it. People just seem to want it because other people seem to want it, but as the series goes on, they just forget about it. Like, as the plotline progresses, the fact that One Piece exists, like, disappears from the minds of our protagonists and literally everyone else they meet. Because the cycle of arcs becomes the same. It's, they go somewhere, they meet injustices and bad people, they overthrow them and cause chaos and leave. And that's just the arc every single time. It never changes. It never becomes different. It never feels like they're making any progress. In fact, the series seems to constantly make it so that progress is not achieved. One of the main problems early on is that they get to the Grand Line, and you're like, okay, we're on the Grand Line, you have to take a special path to get there using a special compass. Okay. And then they get to the end of the Grand Line, and then they're like, oh, by the way, there are a bunch of other paths through the Grand Line that other people took to get here. And this is just the starting point. Like, okay, now you have to go beyond the Grand Line to the New World. Except it's not the New World, because there's already people living there and kingdoms established there, and all the places there are established and a part of the world government, and we'll get to that problem. But it's not new in any sense of the term. We're talking places with hundreds of years of history, apparently. You have a world government that literally spans the world. Nothing is simple. Like, they get there and they're talking about it like they weren't just talking about the Grand Line, because this all exists essentially to obscure the fact that they talked up the Grand Line. The Grand Line didn't end up being anything overly amazing. So now they have to talk up even more things to try and, like, keep the story going because they have no idea how else to make it go, because they've lost the reason our protagonists are going along with the plot line. In fact, multiple characters have their backstories rewritten mid-series because the plot has lost itself. In fact, I would say that the last time that the series was good is the attack on the naval headquarters by Whitebeard and Ace dying. Like, that's the last time there were stakes and things mattered and it felt dramatic and it felt like it was doing something different. Like, the series, like, that was the last time something momentous happened where Ace dies, Whitebeard dies, you know, everything is changing, nothing's going to be the same. That's how it feels. Like, that's the last moment where anything really felt important and felt different than the constant filler arc cycle. Because One Piece, for some reason, writes a story like every arc is filler. In fact, I've never seen a series before that treats its main storyline as a filler storyline everywhere they go. And we'll get to that. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things that I have to say we'll get to that, because there is literally so much stuff going on, and so many plot threads, and so much confusion that the series clearly has no idea what it's doing. So let's for a moment try to focus one at a time on the problems, okay? The characters losing focus and having to be fixed, I guess, in terms of remaking their backstories, I guess you could say. The most obvious one is Sanji, in that he goes from, hi, I was a guy who was working as a cook on a ship in the East Blue, I think, if I remember correctly, and he's like, I want to find the mythical ocean where all fish exist. That's his storyline, that's his motivation, that's his character. It's very simple and straightforward. And for some reason that I cannot understand, the series goes, that's not good enough. That's not amazing enough. We need to rewrite his entire character's backstory. So now he's a member of a gangster family who also all happen to be super science projects, and they're modeled after Sentai characters, and they're all part of a family who serve somebody else, and they want him back, and they're willing to threaten him and marry him off, and there's no real understanding of why this all matters, or why this has never come up, or why they decided to add this all to his character. One thing you need to understand about writing in general is it's a really bad idea to take characters that are established and then add new backstory to them. It's a really bad idea to take established characters and to go, actually, their backstory is wrong and I need to remake it so that I can attach it to new characters. Because all you've done is ruin your own character. There's very few times when changing the backstory once it's been established is a good way to do it, because it's lazy. Part of this is because it doesn't develop your characters. You're trying to undevelop or redevelop your characters, which is not the same thing. Writers who write well and write good characters, especially in adventure stories, develop your characters as things happen. They go places, they experience things, they are changed by the things that they experience. So I'll give you an example. Lord of the Rings is an adventure story. It is a fantasy story, but it is primarily about 3 different groups of people traveling in different ways, experiencing things, and being changed by their journey. It is about characters who are forced to confront things and then forced to confront how they've been changed. Which is why the story at the end, the story that Frodo writes, is there and back again. And at the end, he's by his journey with the One Ring to, Mount Doom, has been changed so much that he can't stay in the Shire anymore. He's been changed by his journey. He's been irrevocably changed. Okay? Now, imagine if halfway through it, if in the middle of the Twin Towers, when like they're traveling to Mordor and they meet Faramir, if Frodo was suddenly like, actually, I'm not from the Shire, I'm from a different place entirely, and I have a completely different family. Bilbo isn't my uncle, Bilbo isn't my uncle, and actually, this isn't the One Ring from Mordor, it's from a completely different place, and this is the new backstory. Because that's what One Piece does with its characters. It just, midway through, changes their backstory for the worse. And so now you feel like you don't know these characters. If you liked Sanji before, if you were like, man, I'm buying into this guy's character and his motivation and what he wants to do with his life, and then suddenly you're told, actually, everything you know about him is a lie. It's all wrong. He's actually part of a completely different family, and he has completely different motivations, and we're not going to explain how he somehow made it from the New World through the Grand Line all the way to the East Blue. Just so he could live as a cook on a completely different ship. There's no reason for any of this. But the bigger one, in many ways, is Luffy himself. Luffy starts off as a character in a podunk town who dreams of being a pirate, who wants to be important and wants to be, king of the pirates because he's obsessed with this idea of discovery and, the prestige and everything else that comes with it. He wants to be, he wants to do something amazing, And then, midway through, the series goes, no, actually, he's from a place in the New World too, and he lived in the shadow of this big, in basically a dumpster heap with Ace, and they actually lived in the shadow with this other guy who we've never mentioned before and never brought up before, who, all three of them lived in the shadow of this, utopia, because everything in One Piece is so one note and so contrasted to the point where you can't take it seriously. Like, the world government people live in such opulence where they, and so free from crimes that they can just, kill people with impunity, take people, off the street if they want them and sell them into slavery. And, everyone's just kind of like, yeah, that's totally fine. And, this is a perfectly normal system and no one would ever want to challenge this. Because, and we'll get into that. Actually, that's another point we'll get into later. We have to focus first on redoing Luffy's backstory. Because they change it to the point where it's like, okay, so Luffy has first-hand knowledge because he's not like a baby. He's he's 7 or 8. He has coherence. He's talking. He's able to theorize and rationalize and talk and come up with ideas and plans. And yet he's living with Ace and this other guy in a dumpster heap in the shadows of this giant opulent place. Basically as the concept of, they're basically living in what would be Charles Dickens' poorhouse, essentially, except it's a country. And they're like, yeah, we want to leave here and do other things. And it's like, how in the hell did he get from there to the east, to wherever the fuck he started, to one of the blue seas? How did he get from there to that island and spend enough time there that they considered him family? That he was born there, is that when he's initially, when you see him in the beginning, everyone's like, yeah, he's family, he lives here, we all care about him, and then they just radically change his backstory for no reason to add in this other character, and well, it's not for no reason. They do it because Ace dies, he's executed, and then they bring in this other character who is basically meant to be brothers to them, a third brother that Luffy and Ace just never talked about and never mentioned before. And it's a bit the best way I can describe it is that it's a bit like when fan fiction writers bring in a character that they want to have be related to a main character, and they're just the main character just kind of goes, yeah, this is my so-and-so relative, who's my brother, sister, cousin, whatever, and they've always existed, I've just never had a reason to talk about them, but I've totally known that they existed, and everyone else seems to know they exist, and they're like really poorly shoehorned into the series. Like, that's what this feels like. That's what this brother character feels like, where he's brought in, essentially given Ace's power, and now he's replacement Ace. And Luffy acts like he's always known this character and just never mentioned him. And, like, this is how everything is treated. Like, it's a perfect summation of how every single thing in One Piece is treated, where new information is given to you and everyone acts like it was always known and it wasn't worth talking about, even though it's super worth talking about because nobody in the audience knows what you're talking about. Also add into the fact that they just start changing things beyond backstories. They start adding rationales for things that don't need or have or deserve rationales, I guess you could say. So, like, for example, there's a D in Luffy's name, and they emphasize that he's Luffy, he's Monkey D. Luffy. That's his, like, that there's a D in there, and they focus on it constantly. And they're like, oh, by the way, Ace also has a D in his name, and people with D's in their name are important for some reason. Why? We're not going to tell you. And they never tell you. And then they're like, actually, his name wasn't Gold Roger, it was Gold D. Roger. And again, why they needed to change that, I don't know. Because they're also like, oh, there's this other guy named Dragon D. whatever. And it's like, he's Luffy's father. Does he play any importance in the story? No, but we keep having to mention it. Because everyone's apparently afraid of this Dragon guy, but Dragon never bothers to show up in the series. Like, again, there's no reason to have mysteries like this if you're not going to explain them. And you could say, oh, well, they'll get around to it. But the problem is, you're over 1,000 chapters in. Okay, you've been telling this story for more than a decade. The time to, stop. The time to, stop adding new mysteries before you solve the ones you got has already passed. I start thinking about Berserk, and, how Berserk is a series that just, because the creator died, it's never going to finish, because he just never got around to it. That's what I think about series like One Piece, because they don't have a story to tell, and the author is definitely going to die before he finishes his story, because he just doesn't know how to finish it, because he doesn't know where he's going with it. And it becomes increasingly obvious as things progress that the author has lost the plot of his own story. Okay? Early on, at the same time that Ace dies, they introduce this concept that there is a world government rebellion organization that rebels against the world government and is trying to bring it down. Are they important? No. But they bring it up, and they bring one of his lieutenants up, which is a weird kind of dig at trans people, it feels like. Because I think Japanese people just really find trans people funny. I don't know. This is a thing I see in other series, and I never understand it. I think it's just Japanese people being transphobic, but I'm not going to, spend time on that point, because it might also be a Kiss reference. I don't... I think it might just be a Kiss reference, but I don't know, because the comedy in One Piece isn't good. He only has 5 jokes, and he repeats them over and over again, and it gets to the point where you can't take anything seriously. The Don Flamingo arc, where they're like, there's this other guy, and he's really big and powerful and scary, but oh, he has a funny voice, and they've only played that joke 100 times, and every time they play it, it just gets less and less funny. It's not nearly as bad as Fairy Tail repeating jokes that aren't funny, but it's bad, because One Piece is better than Fairy Tail at having joke moments, but it's not good at it. Let's put it that way. But they introduce this rebellion force. It's not explained. They introduce the world government and how it works, and it doesn't really work, because actually the world government isn't controlled by all these different kingdoms who gave up their crown to be part of a world government. It's actually controlled by 7 old men in a room, so it's actually more like the Illuminati, and they make random decisions that don't make any sense all the time, and they don't explain their decisions or announce their decisions beforehand. They just make them, and everyone just kind of follows along. Also, this world government apparently has exterminatus power from, like Warhammer 40k, where they just go into kingdoms and just kill them all, like every man, woman, child, living thing. They just annihilate it, and everyone's just kind of cool with this. And they apparently do this semi-regularly, and they're just okay with it. And nobody, like this is not explained about why they can do this. And there's also, like, apparently, like, a lost century where 100 years just were erased from history and no one knows why, and looking into it for any reason is reason to commit exterminatus on an entire country. Like, this is what I mean. Like, all these plot points, you're like, you hear them and you're like, wait a minute, well, okay, why? Why is this added in? What does this bring to the story? What does this have to do with Luffy's desire to find One Piece? And the answer is that it has nothing to do with it, because the desire to find One Piece disappears. And it becomes basically a story about a bunch of people meandering around, having their backstories revised, because the series doesn't have an end goal. Now, I've focused on a different rule already. I've focused on the fact that one of my rules is the bigger the scope, the bigger your problems. That's one of my rules. There's another rule I have when it comes to series, specifically comes to manga and anime. And it's that if you create a place in your series based on feudal Japan, and your series is not about historical feudal Japan, you're officially scraping the bottom of the barrel and you've run out of ideas. Okay? Every series that is like, okay, we go to a place now that's exactly like feudal Japan, basically means that you've run out of ideas. Because it's sort of like when Western series create a character that's basically just an American, like, evil businessman. Like, oh man, he's an evil environmentalist oil tycoon character, and he's rich and evil. You've run out of ideas. You've created something that is not creative at all. There's nothing creative about what you've done. Okay? And One Piece does this, and it becomes a running thing. And it's like, okay, we're going to go to a place where everyone speaks funny, and oh, by the way, the country is locked off from the world, even though the guy who runs the place is suicidal and also, like, is a dragon, and he's one of the 4 emperors, but he also doesn't want to leave, except the fact that he leaves constantly and locks down the country, and it just doesn't make any sense. Like, it's basically just going, hey, there's a place that's like Japanese, isn't that familiar? And that's the long and short of it. There's nothing creative about it. And like that's when I kind of realized that the series has hit the bottom. It's run out of ideas. It has no idea what it's doing or where it's going or why. Like, the series before, like the part with, like, where they go to a different place and fight a different emperor and then win, basically, and then escape, and then that person has like a memory loss problem, and then they stop having a memory loss problem and join up with the other guy, and it's just like, why are we focusing on this? What purpose does this have? Why are we here right now? Why are you putting this to panel? Why are you putting this on the page? Why are we reading this? What point does it have? Where are you going? That's the entire series in a nutshell. Where are you going with this, and why are you telling me about it? I have another rule when it comes to series, and it's also pretty simple. Do not do time skips if you're not going to change anything pre to post time skip. Now, when I say don't change anything, what I mean is dynamics. So normally, when you have a time skip, you're trying to kind of gloss over a bunch of things happening. You're resetting the board. That's the whole point of a time skip. Okay? Something has happened, and it's big and climactic, and the world needs to shake out before we return to our main characters interacting with it. That's the point of a time skip. The other thing you can do with a time skip is create the conditions where lots of things can happen very quickly, and our main characters can now resume being in the same dynamic they were before. So here's a good example. Our main characters have gone on an adventure. They've finished the adventure, they've overcome their foes, and they don't have an adventure lined up now. Or something has happened where they are like injured, or maybe someone has died and they need to find themselves, or something like that. Something like big has happened, or something important has happened, or they've finished a journey and you as a writer need to reset the board before they go on the next one. So you can establish the conditions and how things have changed for the characters and for the world around them when you start the next arc. That's the point of a time skip. What you don't do with a time skip is set out with the same conditions and the same dynamics that you had pre-time skip. Okay? So I'll give you a good example. Of how time skips are done well. So when a time skip is done well, would be, I hate to use it as an example because it's overused, but Dragon Ball Z is really one of the best series in terms of like understanding the bare bones of how you do plots. Like understanding like everything after it doesn't really work. Like Super doesn't really work and GT doesn't work. And Dragon Ball itself is a completely different series with comedy pacing, and that's completely different. Dragon Ball Z, in terms of how you run a shonen series and how you do specific points of that series, could be taught as this is how you do it. This is how you do it right. Okay? So, give you an example. The end of the Frieza arc, the beginning of the Cell arc, is a time skip. Okay? It is a very specific time skip that things happen. Okay? You have, Goku has killed Frieza supposedly, and they need to reset the board for the next arc. So the next things that are happening in the series are Frieza's not actually dead, he's coming to Earth. These are what's happened to our characters since then. So Gohan has now become a teenager now, he's no longer a child. Vegeta is now married. He has a new reason to fight for people on Earth. Goku has been in a coma and has come back, on his way back to Earth. Frieza has been rebuilt and has now come back to Earth. Or now not come back to Earth, but come to Earth in order to exact revenge. And the various androids have had years of time to construct, basically be constructed and set up the conditions for the next plot, for the android arc. So there's a time skip, things have developed, things have progressed, so that everything is ready to go for them to do that arc. Okay? The time skips in One Piece don't do that. The time skips in One Piece don't reset the board. What ends up happening is that every time there's a time skip, they use it to power up the characters so that there's no reason for them to struggle later. Don't do that. That's the whole point of a shonen protagonist is that they're meant to struggle. Characters that don't struggle and fight and are obviously superior to their opponents are not fun to read. Those are not fun. It's not fun to read about characters that always win. I've talked about this before in like the problem with reincarnation manga is that the problem with isekai is that they create main characters who never struggle. And so they're very boring to read because there's no challenge, there's no goal, there's no end point. But that's what it does. It's like, oh, we need, they got to, the end of the Grand Line and now they're all scattered, and like, they're like, okay, here's a time skip. And what's Zoro doing? He's training with the best swordsman on the planet so that he can be even more awesome at the end of the time skip. And it's like, that should be your mate. Like, that's the bread and butter of your series. That's what you're supposed to be doing in your main series, my guy. Like, the main part of your series is supposed to be him as he develops, like, as a character. He's like, I want to be the greatest swordsman on Earth. I'm developing my own sword style, and I want to defeat this guy who's considered the best swordsman on Earth. Like, that's his arc. And so every place he goes, he needs to develop a new sword technique or a new ability or something, so that he can be better. Like, that's his journey. That's his hero's journey through the story. Okay? And so, like having a time skip where he just like is like, yep, now I'm training with this guy who sees my technique and thinks I'm great, and it's like there's no point to that, because now you're just established the fact that he's basically the second best swordsman on Earth and no one else is ever going to be challenging him, or if they do, it's not going to be, as impressive. Like, it's like the whole like the way you tell that story is you start off the way they did in the beginning, where he sees Dracul Mihawk, and he's like, that guy is super impressive, and he doesn't notice me, because I'm not super impressive. And so I want to be impressive and defeat that man. Like, that's my whole goal. That's my goal. I want to beat this man. That's it. Okay? And so the next time he sees that man, he's beaten, but the man notices him. And so he's like, I've made progress. And so now I want to keep being better, okay, as I go along. And so what ends up happening is at the end of his story is when he finally triumphs. He becomes the best swordsman on Earth by defeating his rival. Somewhere along the line, you also have the other guy who's the best acknowledge him as a rival and be like, maybe you do the kind of thing where it's like, he can't die because clearly he's going to rival me one day, and I want that, so I don't want him to die. So I'm going to save his life so that one day he will be better than me, and defeat me, which is what I want because I'm so tired of not having any opponents. You do something like that, where he goes on his own. You don't have that guy train him, because it completely defeats the purpose of their meeting. Their meetings should be climactic and tension-filled. Their meetings should be, these two guys are one day going to meet. You want these two guys to... You every time they meet, every time they're anywhere near each other, you want the audience to be like, oh man, I hope they meet this time. I want to see how they compare this time. I want to see how they meet. You have to build tension up so that happens, so that every time they meet feels momentous. Okay? Having the guy meet him and be like, yeah, I trained with him for a few years, it's like, you've now just killed any tension that exists in their meetings, because you've normalized their interactions. Now when they meet, it's just they know each other. There's no tension or drama or uniqueness to it. And that's pretty much how it goes with most of the characters and how they meet people. Because there's never... The series doesn't know where to go, as I said, and so it doesn't know how to build up characters anymore. So, for example, the four emperors were seen as being, like, in the beginning, are treated, as I said earlier, like gods. They are monstrous figures who loom over the world that not even the world government can control or stop. They are treated like natural disasters that are like forces of nature. Like, they cannot be defeated, and their mere presence shakes the heavens. That's how they're treated. And then the series basically decides that no, our main characters are going to oppose them directly. And so that ends up with the whole Sanji reimagined arc, where they're like, we're going to fight Big Mom, who's one of the big four. The other four being Blackbeard, long-haired Shanks, red-haired Shanks, and the fucking dragon guy whose name escapes me at the moment, who wants to kill himself because he's tired of being alive, I guess, because he's just too powerful. And so every time we meet him, he's like trying to end his own life, which isn't really interesting or funny anymore, because it just doesn't go anywhere. Like most other things, it doesn't go anywhere. Anyway, the big four are treated as a huge deal. They are treated as the most important beings, essentially, besides the world government. And it's said that going against them is basically like trying to fight a god. You're going to lose, and you're going to die. You're going to die horribly and pitifully, because there's nothing anyone can do. These are beings who control entire nations and who bend entire populations to their will. So, for example, Big Mom has created her domain so that every single person, like every nation in her domain, does one thing. They focus on one kind of food. That's all they do. And they have to, because if they don't, Big Mom will kill all of them. Like, that's like, that's her storyline, okay? She is, like, depicted as this horrible being, and so they're like, okay, we're gonna kill her now and oppose her directly. Okay, and then they do, and then they live, and it's like, she becomes normalized, she becomes a joke. She becomes, like, they start playing her off as a comedy character. Like, she takes people's souls out and turns them into, like, living objects. So, like, she's surrounded by, like, a sun and a thundercloud, and they're, like, super powerful, but then they're treated like jokes. Like, then they go, like, then they're, like, you know, then she's treated as a joke. Like, she loses her memory and washes them on a beach and becomes childlike. Like, she's a giantess, and they're like, she bends entire nations to her will. She eats people's souls, and it's just like, and then, you know, she's just a glutton who rampages if she doesn't get what she wants, and she's just, like, Luffy and crew oppose her, and everybody who opposes her gets out. And that's it. And it's just like, why? And then they go to the other guy's place, who turns into a dragon, and Luffy's like, I'm gonna punch you in the face. And it's like, even if, which means one of two things. A, your main character is stupid, to the point where he's been Flanderized. How do you pronounce that? Flanderized? From Ned Flanders from The Simpsons, and how you become, like, take a character trait, and it gets worse and worse as the series goes on. Like, your character is so stupid that he's like, that guy is considered a god. He's considered the most dangerous, most powerful being in the world. He is undisputedly one of the most, like, threatening beings, whose very presence has ensured that an entire population is not allowed to leave and nobody's allowed to show up. Like, he is considered so powerful and so dangerous that his mention... Oh, I remember now. It's Kato the Beast. Like, that's his name. It's Kato. Kato the Beast. He's so dangerous and so monstrous that everybody is terrified of him. And your main character's like, I'm going to punch him in the face. Which means one of two, again, either A, your main character is stupid to the point where they are too stupid to live because they are punching a dude who's basically God in the face. Or B, the guy is not powerful enough that he deserves his name. Okay? Because a character like that, who's been built up to the point where if anyone disobeys him, he will destroy entire nations. On a whim, sometimes. He gets punched in the face and just one-shots the main character. Okay, that's fine. I mean, that's what should have happened, but the problem is that now that he's been punched in the face, it kind of dilutes his aura a bit, because the response should be, this man attacked me, I should just brutally murder him. And that should be the end of the series. But no, he's like, I'm going to enslave this man and let him become stronger and overthrow me eventually. Like, there are certain things that you need to do when you build up an adversary. You need to build them up as being untouchable in some cases. A guy who's like this, who's meant to be a god, to have your main characters fuck with them and have nothing happen because of it is not good. It is horribly bad to have main characters mess with their adversaries and have the adversaries basically do the one thing that's going to let them come back. Because it either makes your adversary look stupid, or it makes them look like they shouldn't be in that position. Because everyone can see coming what's going to happen. At least you should be able to, assuming the series can hold its attention for 5 seconds. And this brings up another problem of characters that should be adversaries not being adversaries, or characters that are innately evil being in the same league or the same profession as our protagonists. And it kind of fits to the whole nothing makes any sense, or nothing, there's no moral center to the series. Okay? Now, every series has a moral center. And it doesn't mean there are good or bad characters, it means that there is some form of center on the compass to distinguish characters that live within this world, or to distinguish the universe and the rules that the universe works by. So to bring up Berserk again, Berserk is a very negative to evil universe, where the moral center of the universe is dark and almost is grimdark, and most beings in it are either outright evil or hidden, I guess, like, they're either, like, obviously, overtly, violently evil, or they're neutral, which in this universe is evil. So just being neutral means not caring about other people. It means barely surviving. Good people are rare. Good outcomes are even rarer. Everybody is essentially at the mercy of dark powers or evil people. Like, that's the center of the Berserk universe. One Piece's problem is that it's focusing on pirates, okay? Now, pirates are not good people, historically speaking. Like, they've been mythologized as being, like, anti-establishment. Oh, they're opposing the evils of the crowns of Europe, you know, of nobility. They're the working class heroes who fight injustice. And it's like, yeah, but they're kind of like Vikings in that they also rape, pillage, you know, murder lots of people, kill lots of, you know, they do really bad things. Okay, they are very bad people. Okay, who do bad things by our modern day standards, or even the standards of the day. Do pretty terrible things to other people, who normally attack merchants and are greedy bastards who spend all of their time hurting people who probably don't deserve it. Okay, most pirates didn't spend their time attacking heavily armed military ships owned by the crown because they didn't have any money, and also you were probably going to die. In fact, that's why certain pirates gained recognition for taking military ships, because it was A, rare, and B, really impressive if you were able to do that and didn't die horribly in the process. Like, that's why certain pirates gained, fame for themselves. The thing is about the One Piece universe is that it doesn't seem to understand where its moral center is. And you usually shouldn't have a moral center established on your main characters, because you don't want character-centered morality. Okay? You don't want things to be good just because your main characters are doing it. Okay? You don't want them to define... You don't want people's, like, friendliness or opposition to the main characters to be the deciding factor of whether or not they're good or bad. Okay? So, like, the problem is that you have, like, the world government, who is depicted as being innately evil, horribly corrupt, unspeakably cruel, and entirely nihilistic, to the point where they will, without question or hesitation, annihilate kingdoms full of innocent people. They will commit genocide without a second thought. On the other side of the coin are pirates, who, by and large, are evil, horrible people. Most of the other pirates we meet from the beginning are terrible human beings. Some of them aren't even human beings, and they're still terrible. Like, Arlong is a terrible, like, he's not the first evil pirate you meet, but he's one of, like, the first ones to, like, bring up the fact that he was in the crew of one of the guys who was a part of, like, the pirates that turned good, and he decided he didn't want to, and so now he's evil. He's still evil, obviously, but, like, Arlong is, like, one of the first. Don Krieg, all the early pirates are depicted as being evil. And as you go along, most of the ones they encounter are evil. Guys like Crocodile are evil. They are obviously openly evil. Don Flamingo is evil. These are people who are doing horrible, unspeakable things to people who don't deserve it, and are in opposition to our protagonists, but are, like, the reason they're depicted as being evil and are, like, what makes our protagonists good is that, like, they're not really pirates. They don't steal anything. They don't act like pirates. They just go from place to place and, like, cause problems for actual pirates. Because every other pirate we meet, essentially, is a terrible human being. Like, the series doesn't square the series does not square the concept of pirates are a scourge on the world, and the fact that the world that they're in is already scourged by a whole bunch of other things, and that our main characters want to be a part of a faction that is a scourge to the world. Like, it creates a very uneven moral, ethical structure, because it's like, oh, everything our protagonists do is good. Every time they show up and overthrow a kingdom, it's always good. Every time that they do anything, it's always good, even if other people hate them. And, like, they put Luffy and the Straw Hat Pirates in with what the group that they call the worst generation, which right on its face is wrong, because the Pirate King already existed. The Pirate King has already existed. Pretty sure his generation must have been worse if he was the worst being to ever exist in the history of the world. Pretty sure he must have been worse. And, like, so, like, they're like the worst generation. And all of the other pirates, as a part of the worst generation, start off by being terrible, horrible people. And then as the series progresses and the creator is like, oh man, I need allies for my, like, protagonists, he basically starts altering all of the characters that he started off in the worst generation and makes them, like, slightly more good as things progress. So, like, for example, one of them is, like, the guy when he fights Big Mom is, like, a mobster themed dude. And it's like, yeah, this guy is so evil because he's killed every single person he's ever worked under. Like, his kink or fetish is that he murders every captain he's sailed under. That's his thing. And now he's under Big Mom and he wants to oppose Big Mom. That's his whole thing. And it's like, this dude's awful. But then they're like, well, actually, he has the love of his life, and, you know, he's doing it out of love. And it's like, why? Because basically they can't square the fact that Luffy, like, the Straw Hat Pirates as beacons of good can't work as allies with horrible people who do horrible things. And so everybody they have to work with has to turn good, or has to be more like them, because if they don't, then you'll start asking, wait a second, aren't these people terrible? And it happens to everyone. Like, when he goes to fight Kato and he's thrown in prison, it's like, oh man, here's Captain Kidd, I think it is. And, like, Kidd is, like, before a terrible person who actively enjoys murdering people and, like, is horribly cruel. And then they're like, well, actually, now he's not like that anymore. And it's like, why did you create these character traits and these characters if your whole idea was to turn them into less horrible characters later on? And you could say that this is partially like, oh, they've come into contact with our protagonist, and the protagonist has imparted upon them the virtues of being good people. But no, they're still pirates. They're terrible people. Like, it happens to Crocodile. Crocodile, who's established as being a horrible person who took over a kingdom and murders lots of people. It's like, actually, now he's good because he was beaten by the straw. Like, don't do this. The character-centered morality is a terrible thing in a series. You can do a series about pirates being evil and your main characters being like, that's not what makes pirates. That's not how pirates are supposed to be. We want to be essentially gentlemen pirates. Like, if that's what you want to do, like, you can do that. You can write a series like that, but that's not the story they're telling. That's not this, like, that's not the story or the characters. Like, that's not what the storyline is. The storyline doesn't care about any of the character alignments enough to make it so anything feels consistent. Every character who is depicted as an adversary either, like, becomes good or becomes a joke, because the main characters don't seem to, like, they can't associate with openly evil characters without the audience asking how that's possible. And they can't obviously become main characters because we already have too many main characters. So we're kind of stuck. You're stuck in this situation. I think a bigger problem beyond that, though, is that the main character has now opposed and defeated one of the big four. He's now opposing and on track to defeat a second of the big four. And we don't know why, because defeating them hasn't changed anything. Okay, Big Mom is still in control of her empire, is still doing terrible things. And even if Kato loses, like, unless he dies, which is what he wants, like, there's no end game here. The Straw Hat Pirates are not getting closer to anything by doing what they're doing. They're not, like, going towards a goal. They're not approaching a destination. Okay? They're not, like, they're not any closer to finding, like, the ocean with all the stuff in it. They're not any closer to finding One Piece because nobody knows what it is and it's barely mentioned, and, you know, nobody knows why you would want it. So, like, the big four apparently don't care. Like, you would think they're in the position, like, to get it if they wanted it. Like, you would think that would be the driving thing for them. It's like, oh, all four of them, you know, are the biggest, most powerful pirates who control the most territory, and they're closest to finding, like, this treasure because of it, and that's why everyone wants to either, like, join them and find it with them or supplant them. Like, that's what you would create this structure as. And so our main characters would oppose them because they're like, in order to get what we want, we need to either be better than they are, we either need to replace them or be a part of them. And because all four of them are terrible people who don't align with our vision of what a pirate should be, we should replace them. Like, that's how you would do it. Or you would structure it as all these four are former members of Gold Roger's crew. Or, like, after Gold Roger was executed, his underlings split and all began to fight each other over One Piece, and it was lost. And so they're still fighting each other, or their descendants are fighting each other, and the only way to get One Piece is going to be to defeat all of them. Like, that's how you would normally structure this story, because otherwise, the fact that there's four emperors doesn't have any meaning to the main characters. There's no reason for the main characters to oppose them, except because the plot says so. You know? Like, okay, they're gonna fight Kato. Why? What does defeating Kato accomplish? What does fighting... Like, the whole reason they fought Big Mom was because Sanji was like, okay, I have to go back and marry somebody because my family says so, and so Big Mom doesn't kill a whole bunch of people. Okay, but then he was like, oh, I'm not going to tell my crewmates this because then they'll follow me, even though he was there with enough of them to know that they were going to follow him anyway. So there was no point to any of that. Like, he should have just gone, okay, hey, by the way, my family business is coming up, which I've never talked about before because reasons, I guess. I'll depend on you guys for my life, but I can't tell you about my secret history for some reason. And then, like, they oppose Big Mom for that reason, but nothing is accomplished. Nothing is... Like, they defeat Big Mom, and it's like, okay, now we're leaving, bye. And then they're gone, and it's like, what was accomplished? what did... Like, nothing none of the characters got any closer to any of their goals. None of the characters even seem to have goals anymore. They all just seem to exist. And, like, this is what I mean when I say that the entire series feels like filler. They go to a place, they cause upheaval and overthrow everyone, and then they just leave, and nothing was accomplished. They're no closer to getting to their goal. It's not going anywhere. The series doesn't feel like it's going anywhere, and that's a problem when you're like 1,000 chapters in. Okay? 1,000, there's only one other series that I can think of that has this problem, and it's, I know I'm going to mispronounce this, and I apologize, but it's Hajime no Ippo. It's the boxing series about a boxer named Ippo, except midway through the series, Ippo retires. But the series continues. So now there's all these other people who are doing things, but Ippo himself is a non-entity in his own series. And so the series just continues, but it doesn't feel like it's actually going anywhere, because the main character isn't doing anything that is furthering his own goals, because the main character doesn't have any goals. And One Piece feels the same way. One Piece feels like a series where the main characters do not have goals that they are working towards. It doesn't feel like any of the arcs get them any closer to the people, or the people they need to get to be with, or get the things that they need. Like, everything feels like a MacGuffin. Everything feels like filler. Everything feels like we as an audience waste our time reading it. It doesn't feel like progress has been made. Okay? Like there's not a purpose to this. There's no real sense that you're going to be rewarded for reading. Now, if you just if you just want a story not being told, and there are lots of people who just particularly I like the characters and I just like to see things happen, that's perfectly reasonable. But that doesn't make it good, is my point. Is that, it's perfectly valid to enjoy things happening. There are lots of series where things just happen. There's lots of comedy series where things just happen. The problem is that One Piece is trying to be everything at all times. It's trying to be a comedy series. It's trying to be an adventure series. It's trying to be an action series. It's trying to be dramatic. It wants to be serious at times. It brings up serious topics like children being experimented on. It brings up concepts of class and, genocide and all these other things that do not belong in a series that's meant to be lighthearted and comedic a lot. It's very hard to be okay, here's a character and here's a character and he's got a funny voice, but also he's a part of a group which is funding the experimentation of children. These things clash and don't work together. These are things that don't mesh as a coherent whole. So what you end up with is just a lot of different plot threads, a lot of different ideas, a lot of different just concepts thrown together seemingly at random that don't go anywhere, that don't mean anything, that actively punish the reader for investing in. Because if you're invested in, the Straw Hat Pirates journey, if you're invested in, them getting to their goal, you're basically the series is laughing in your face because it doesn't have a goal. The series has jettisoned any sense that there is an end point where they're going to one day find the thing that leads them to One Piece. Because One Piece is barely mentioned in this series. They're like, man, this thing is super important and people will kill over it. And it's well, okay, what is it then? It's a treasure. But what does that mean? It feels like, because I'm going to say this, and I know that it's probably I really hope it's not true, but thinking on it now, honestly, it would surprise me if it wasn't true. Because it would be a massive troll. But the series seems to really like trolling its audience. So, for those of you who know the song by Coven, One Tin Soldier, it's a song about, like, it's a real 1960s song about two armies, like one who lives on a hill and one who live in a valley. And the valley people hate the hill people because the hill people have some kind of treasure. And like there's a giant rock and it says under this stone is a great treasure. And so like the valley people are like, it's not fair that the mountain people have this treasure. And so the whole song is about like the mountain people like get murderously slaughtered by the valley people. And then the valley people go to the rock and they lift the rock up to see what's under it, to see what the treasure is. What's the treasure that they were hiding? And it says peace on earth. Like that's the treasure. The treasure is peace on earth. That's what I guarantee. Like that's what a One Piece is going to be. I guarantee you, they're going to get to the that's probably what they're going to pull out of their ass. Like the song is meant, like One Tin Soldier is meant to be like a lament of like how easily people are led to violence and led to killing each other over pointless, stupid things that don't matter. And I almost guarantee what's going to end up happening is whenever they find it, they're going to be like, get to like where One Piece is. And they're going to be like, here's One Piece. And it's going to say friendship. And they're going to be like, friendship was the treasure was inside of us all along. That's what it's going to be. Because the series is a troll. That's what it feels like. The series feels like it's trolling the audience. And it didn't start out that way. It feels like when it started out, it had a plan and an idea. And then somewhere along the line, he just couldn't stop himself. Or maybe it's a situation where he became so successful. Like he became so successful that people stopped being able to tell him no. You know, like you become big enough, you become secure enough that people are like, well, you're printing money, so, you know, why should we tell you no? And there's a lot of creators that get to that point. Like M. Night Shyamalan, for example, is a creator who, when he started, produced a couple really great films. And then he became successful enough where basically he got a blank check and like they just couldn't tell him no. And he started producing garbage. And the same goes for guys like Zack Snyder, who produced a couple really great movies. And then they were like, okay, we're just going to let you do whatever you want. And, you know, it fails. Like the next movie he does on his own fails, like on its own. God, who was the guy who did the Dark Knight trilogy, the Batman trilogy, where he's Christopher Nolan? He's another guy who became so big and famous that basically they basically just said, hey, whatever you want to do, print money. You know, you're a money printer. Whatever you want to make, we don't care. You're too big and too famous. There's no reason we should, like, rein you in. Because obviously everything you touch turns to gold. And then he makes Tenet and it bombs. You know, this happens all the time with creators who become successful. Where they get, because nobody around them will tell them no because they've become so successful, they fail to... They failed to be reined in, and they stopped being able to tell the difference between good ideas and bad ideas. And that's what it feels like right now. That's what One Piece feels like. One Piece feels like a meandering series because the creator is just throwing everything that he thinks and everything that he wants into the series, and everyone around him is like, well, he's the creator of One Piece, so why should we, like, what do we know about telling him what he's doing? And no one's willing to be like, hey, you know, your series is kind of off, you know, falling off the rails, and it just kind of sucks. Like, there's no other way to put it now. Like, even if you think individual moments are cool, even if you think on the whole, like, the characters are still interesting. It's not going anywhere. It's not paying off for you, the reader. It's not paying. It's not. It's not bringing you satisfaction or closure on anything. It's not driving you in a direction. Nothing about it feels like, hey, you, the reader, have been reading for over 1,000 chapters, and you've been taking this journey with these characters, and ostensibly, you really want to see them succeed. You want to see Luffy become king of the pirates. You want to see Usopp be the best, the best marksman there ever was. You want to see Zoro become the best swordsman there ever was. You want to see, you want to see, like, Sanji find, the mythical ocean. You want these characters to succeed, and you want to be a part of that success. That's the whole reason people read fiction. Like, the whole reason that people read adventure fiction specifically. This is one of the things, like, the reason you're reading this story is because you want to see them succeed, and you want to feel all the good moments, and you want to see them at their worst moments. You want to see them at their best moments. You want to see them triumph. You want to see them struggle and feel their pain and feel how hard they're working to get where they want to go. And then you want to drink in the success that comes with them actually succeeding. But you can't do that if you're not making progress. If you're just meandering on a horizontal line, if the plot is not progressing upwards towards the climax, you're just wasting your time. At some point, you just check out because you're like, it's not going anywhere. That's really what One Piece feels like, and it's disappointing. Because ostensibly it can be good. It was good. Like, that's why, like, when you talk about, like, when I think of, like, what was good in this series, I'm like, man, the death of Ace, that whole period of the passion of this character who the audience feels for. The audience can feel the emotions of this character that we care about dying. Like, so much happens, and it's chaotic, and you can feel how unjust, how cruel, how heartless this series, how the world is. And you feel in that moment, you're like, this is what your characters are opposing. Except they're not. Because our main characters are not involved in the opposing of the government and don't directly work to fighting the main government. So all of those feelings go to waste because we don't know who the Pirate King is, how do you become the Pirate King? And, how do you find One Piece? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. And they haven't gotten any closer to knowing in over 1,000 chapters. And it just is... It's a mess. It feels like a mess. Maybe... And if you like that, that's fine. But I can't justify... I can't justify saying it's good. Because it isn't. There are moments of brilliance in this series, and there are moments where it's clear. It's like you can see why the series became what it was early on. If you go back and read the early volumes, you can still see why people got invested in these characters. You can still see why these characters became as big as they did. And you can really see where the whole thing has fallen apart. The wheels are off the wagon, and it's not progressing. And it's going to be really hard to get back to that if they ever do. As I said, I'm pretty sure the whole series is going to end with, One Piece was friendship all along, and the real treasure was the journey you got to get here. That's how I think that's what I think they're going to pull out of their ass. I really do. I think that's what they're going to pull out their ass. And it's going to be disappointing, and it's going to be like the end of Naruto, where everyone's like, wait, that's it? That's how you end your series? That's how you end all this? And he's going to be like, yep, and then try to make a sequel series, probably. Assuming he lives long enough to finish the series, which he might not, because not everybody does, and it becomes harder to do that in an age of global pandemic. So, I hope he finishes it. I hope he makes a series he always wanted to do, and he doesn't turn into Don Bluth, essentially, and spend his entire life trying and failing to make a series that he always wanted to make. I really hope that, I hope One Piece becomes, finds a way to have a satisfying conclusion. I really do. But anyway, I've talked too long about this. There's my thoughts on One Piece, the giant mess of a series that it is. See y'all next time.